Hey everyone, it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen to the story, Colorado River Zombie Outbreak. Rafting Trip Turns Deadly. I didn't plan on being a trip leader. I'm a civil engineer who writes reports about water intake structures and flood resiliency for desert towns that will never be famous. The Grand Canyon was supposed to be my long break, the thing I finally said yes to after years of promising myself I'd run the river end to end. We launched at Lee's Ferry on a brisk April morning with the kind of clear air you only get after a night of desert cold. The water knifed out of Glen Canyon Dam at refrigerator temperature around 50 degrees, slate green and fast. Our permit window had lined up with two friends who guide on their off-seasons, so I had the luxury of being a strong second rather than the voice on the oars everyone stared at when things went sideways. There were 14 of us in the flotilla, 3 18-feet self-bailing rafts, 1 14-feet rig, and a pair of duckies for the people who swore they couldn't be happy unless they were closer to the water. Ray and Jordan were our guides, both veterans of this corridor and its weather moods. Big Dan, an Arizona diesel mechanic with forearms like cedar stumps, paired with me on the blue 18-footer, stacked with food boxes, the group kitchen, and our river toilet. An aluminum rocket box we tried to treat like it was invisible, because telling yourself it's invisible is how you carry it with any grace at all. We strapped Pelican cases along the frames, first aid, repair tools, satellite messenger, spare VHF for line of sight within the team. In the dry bay, I kept my work habit, a waterproof notebook, and a pencil that could write even on wet Tyvek. The ranger at launch went through the usual talk: food storage, trash, ancient ruins, campsite etiquette, the legalities about firearms in parks allowed compliant with state law, never discharged in the park, and an extra beat about not letting anyone wander off alone. It made sense. The shoulder season draws people who overestimate what cool desert morning means after the sun drops behind the rim. He finished with, "You're on your own down there more than you think. If you need help, use whatever satellite unit you've got to reach dispatch. Don't count on a quick ride out." We nodded the way people nod when they are too excited to hear the warnings. By River Mile 8, Badger Creek Rapid, we were tuned to each other. That first bump of consequence tightened the straps across our chests and put a joint focus into the crew. Helmets adjusted, Type 5 PFDs snugged so you could barely breathe. The scent of wet basil and sun-warmed tamarisk came off the banks, mixing with the mild chemical tang of sunscreen. If you have never rode into a rapid with heavy boxes and the word leader in someone's mind, I can report that your breath goes shallow. Your plan seems too simple, and suddenly you feel every cam strap as if it were part of your own ribs. We ran Badger Clean. We ran Soap Creek Clean too at River Mile 11.5, and we were feeling good when the first strange thing happened. A man stood 60 yards downstream, knee-deep in an eddy, not fishing, not moving, just watching the way the shine of the back current combed and unfolded. He didn't react to us at all. We waved, called nothing. We weren't close enough to land without making a scene of it against the eddy line. And there were other private parties on the water. We told ourselves he was with one of them. Rye kept her eyes on him longer than the rest of us and said quietly, "Mark it in the log." I wrote it down. Day 1, Eddy Watcher. No response to hail, posture rigid, hands at sides. At the time, it felt like the kind of note you make so you can tell a story later about the OD-ness of people at the river. House rock at mile 17 made us forget. We fied left of the big lateral and rode the tongue with that hollow, drifting elevator, feeling only canyon waves produce. We pulled out in the eddy below, whooped, swapped snacks between boats. Omar, a quiet photographer with a soft spot for industrial bridges, showed me the shot he caught from the stern, our raft sketched in spray. The carved limestone above us shining like bone in the noon light. We made camp early in a wind shadow, and the day sank into the usual river rhythm. Tents in the lee, boats' cams strapped high for the night, kitchen tarps staked, and lines strung from driftwood. Lily, an ICU nurse from Phoenix who moves like she never forgets the floor beneath her feet, checked the med kit and then sat on a dry bag watching the river until the lighter went purple. "Odd bulletin at camp," Jordan said as the stars came out. He'd taken the in-reach up to a rim, high point, where the view south opened enough for a clean signal. There's chatter about a cluster of strange neurological cases in Utah and northern Arizona. Avoid untreated water if you can. That part is just good sense here, but the tone is different. No order to evacuate or anything, and I can't tell if it's official or just echoing posts. A river trip is the opposite of breaking news. We were already living the way those messages advise. We filtered and boiled river water, kept our hands clean, treated small cuts like they mattered. We took the notes seriously, but not dramatically. We slept to the engine deep sound of the current. The next morning at Red Wall Cavern, the huge sandstone amphitheater on a left bend, we played like everyone plays, throwing a disc under a ceiling sky with holes you could frame constellations through, footprints stippling the sand. It was only after we'd loaded up and pushed back into the current that Lily said, "Hold on," and pointed up canyon. On the bench above the cavern, 4 hikers stood evenly spaced at the rim edge. She would have been the only one to notice. It looked at first like any grow, up taking a long look across a beautiful thing, but they stood too still. No shade, no movement, no phones raised for pictures, just fixed stances and faces bent toward the river as if it were giving instructions. We started to see it everywhere. At North Canyon, a Varsi's paradise where water bursts out of the red wall and turns the riverbanks lush in one sudden moment. At Nanka, where the granaries above the camp sit in their perfect alcove, a memory you can climb into. People froze in lines the way wind aligns desert grass. If we hailed, some blinked and turned a few degrees but didn't really look at us as people, more like we were bright spots flickering on water. We rationed our attempts at contact. There's only so much you can do when you're a tiny convoy on moving water and the banks of the world are a vertical mile high. At the confluence with the Little Colorado, we pulled into the sandy shallows on River Right and stared at the confluence line where turquoise met chocolate. It's one of those surreal places where two truths touch without mixing for a while. We found a laminated sign half buried in the sand. Restricted access beyond this point. Protect culturally sensitive areas. The sign wasn't new. It was a reminder the place keeps giving. Up canyon in the turquoise water, 5 people stood spaced along the narrows, all ankled deep, all watching the seam where the 2 colors went to braid. Jordan called out with the same range of voice he uses when it matters. "We've got supplies. Do you need help?" One of the 5 lifted a hand in a slow rhythm, like someone trying to feel the exact beat of something you and I couldn't hear. That night, the satellite messenger came alive. The health department alert was brief and careful. Clusters reported in multiple counties. Symptoms include fixed gaze, diminished response, rhythmic limb movements, strong attraction to repetitive audio-visual stimuli, flowing water, rotating machinery. There were words about keeping distance from symptomatic individuals, avoiding unfiltered water exposure to mucous membranes, and an ask to report sightings if safe. None of it used the word the internet had already thrown like a net over the whole phenomenon. On the canyon floor, with the hiss of braided current threading through our camp, the word didn't help or hurt. We were already adjusting. We tightened our hygiene plan. Boil water as well as filter it. No more playful face splashing, even when the days got hot. Gloves on if anyone had to help someone from another group. And then a wash with the little hand pump Danny rigged. We picked camps with high benches a little farther from side creeks. It felt extreme until it felt exactly right. The first scare in our own party happened 2 days later after the long stretch of river that flows like thinking does when you walk. We had passed the entire Topet sandstone story on the walls and come to Hants Rapid at mile 77, where the canyon narrows down to a conversation. We scouted the mess of boulders and lateral waves. I watched Jordan point at a run that mapped into my mind like a diagram. We re-rigged tight, stowed loose items, said the little jokes people say when they know bravery is mostly practice. The river carried us like we were the plan, rather than us carrying any plan at all. When it was over, I remember the feeling in my wrists alive and humming, like I could feel the water's memory through aluminum and grip tape. At camp after Hants, Omar sat with his enamel mug untouched. The cup is how I notice before anything else. He keeps it within reach like a talisman. Anne asked him softly for a hand with the tart bridge line. Omar blinked, nodded, and walked to the edge of the water instead. He stood, hands at his sides, face tipped to the glide between two tiny eddies where the light pinned under a willow branch. Rai saw his posture, went to him calmly, touched his elbow, and tilted him away from the water's line of sight. "Let's sit, friend," she said. "Eyes on me. Breathe like you're seeing a big negative come up in the tray." He laughed once in recognition. It arrived late to his face and came with us. Lily did her quiet nurse assessment. Pupils reactive, no fever, no headache. She asked him to sip warm tea while she watched him. He did. Something in him loosened back into the circle. He told us later that his head filled with a rhythm he knew he could hold if he looked at the little currents. Like a song you can almost name. It scared him as he said it, and he cried once. A simple, embarrassed sound anyone who has reached their edge makes when they realize they found it. From Hants, we pulled hard to Phantom Ranch, timing arrival with the midday lull, the black bridge, the silver one upstream, the way Bright Angel Creek walks down to join the Colorado. These are images so many people know from postcards and calendars. Seeing them from water you rode to get there makes them feel like your own hands. We beached the rafts with deliberate straightness, made fast lines to Tamarisk, and walked up the trail in small units. Jordan carried the SAT unit higher into the corridor, where the walls allowed a message to go anywhere beyond this place. The canteen was closed, except for a note in marker. Emergency operations only. Please leave notes with needs. The bulletin board had the kind of quick tape paper that shows the speed and reality of response. South Rim medical staging expanded, corridor open only for evac with escort. There were a few. Mule wranglers gathered under shade, their animals stepping in unison like the canyon had taught them a metronome. Outside the little park service office, 2 rangers worked with a volunteer team, taking names and matching them to permits and rough plans. People spaced themselves out in loose lines that had nothing to do with tape on the ground and everything to do with wanting to read each other's faces. One ranger met us with the polite directness of a person who had repeated the same messages for several days without losing their humanity. "We're aware of cases downriver," she said. "Symptoms vary. The thing we're seeing here, people drawn to the river's surface geometry and to mechanical rhythms, it's like a trance. If you maintain hands-on connection and eye contact, some can be guided away. We don't understand disease course yet, but we've seen some snap back like a tide going slack. The biggest safety ask, Don't let anyone in your party wander near current alone. Jordan reported the little Colorado scene. She nodded with something like relief just to have the picture rounded out. We asked about emergency extraction, resource constrained, she said, and you could see how much she wished another word existed for what they were living. We're coordinating with Hella bases, but our priority is people who cannot move under their own power. You all are equipped, you're experienced. If you stay together and keep your plan, your best option is to move toward Diamond Creek for road access. If things worsen in the corridor, we'll post notices on the bridges and at camps where we can reach them. We walked back over the Black Bridge in a small line, each of us touching the side rail at least once, as if to confirm the way metal holds fast. On the downstream side of the bridge, 3 people stood along the pedestrian decking evenly spaced, looking at the river's surface and not at the span beneath their feet. A volunteer asked them to come with her. 2 followed. The third turned a few deggy. Reese as if someone had changed the angle of a lamp. After Phantom, the river tightened the screws on us. Horn Creek at mile 90.8 gets your attention the way a slap of cold water does. We scouted from the left, planed a clean but assertive line that asked you to commit without bargaining. Then Granite, then Hermit, mile 95. Those perfect sinuous stacks of standing waves marching down in ranks. The set that makes people shout involuntarily, even when they promised they wouldn't. We ran Hermit in series, a little convoy like a necklace moving from bead to bead. The blue raft, ours, drove the tongue with a square bow and steady pulls. Midway, a side wave shouldered us hard. Dan's orc hit air, and then nothing. For half a second, the raft thought about flipping. We corrected on instinct, weight forward, blades in, and came out the last V with spray fractures shining like a glass chandelier above us. The downstream eddy caught us and rumbled the bottom like distant thunder. We looked at each other and grinned, because it is impossible not to. Crystal waited 3 me later like a reputation with a personality. We pulled left to scout shouldered lines out of the brush and found the usual arguments going in whispers, left through the rock garden or right center, balancing consequences. We are not the kind of team that votes by volume. Jordan walked the tongue with his eyes, then walked it again. Rye traced the options with her hand like she was drawing a topographic map on air. We agreed on right of center, making speed early and reading the holes as shapes, not stories, adjusting mid-move because all good plans require humility when they meet real water. We made it through Crystal without drama. Another private boat behind us bounced, came down crooked and lost a duffel. We caught it with a throw line swinging a neat arc that felt like grace. The couple on that boat sat very still after. Well, not from fear, I think, but from the fragility of gratitude. They looked at us like we were their cousins. After Crystal, we camped at Monument Creek, evergreens scrubbing the cliff base with their scent. Between dinner and sleep, we took watches. Call it superstition, call it good practice, but we agreed. No one was to stand alone near moving water or machinery, the water wheel in a side canyon, a windmill, even the rhythmic sway of the handy little fans someone clipped to a tent pole. We told stories in pairs over small headlamp halos, so our minds had rhythm that belonged to us. During my second watch that night, I heard whispering, not words, the air sound of breath moving through a half-closed mouth. 3 shapes stood 50 feet from the boats at the edge of the lower bench. They were not from our party. They stood facing the river. For a breath, I forgot the rule. And look where they were looking. In the high slack hours before dawn, the river surface makes a pattern like woven wire. It's beautiful. It vibrates in a way that makes you understand why people have always believed in river gods. I heard Ray behind me, her palm warm on my shoulder, present anchoring. "Eyes on me," she said with a quiet voice you used to call someone back from a height. I breathed, counted off a number set I have used since I was a kid to organize fear. Primes up to 50 and the geometry lost its power. We eased those 3 visitors up the bank with soft talking and gave them warm water and a place to sit. One wore a trail crew shirt, one a tech conference hoodie, one the universal uniform of a person who has learned to trust pockets. They looked at us with the same slow focus Omar had used when he took his cup back into his hands. They left at first light with a group we hadn't heard arrive, a little chain of people holding shoulders in a line like kindergartners crossing a street. The canyon kept teaching us the same lesson. Water was the magnet and the mirror. When we ran side hikes to Elbs's chasm, we moved together and we didn't linger in the narrow under the pour-over where songs echo. At Deer Creek Falls, we admired the perfect ribbon of water and then backed off because a dozen people had gathered there in the spray like they were listening to a choir. At Macadamia, we decided the slot was a risk we didn't need to weigh. We waved from boats and kept rolling. We put a red mark through the glamour shot on our trip plan, spending a lush hour at Havasu Creek, and replaced it with something simpler. Keep moving toward Diamond Creek, where a dirt road meets the river, and the Halapai have long-run day trips and rescues. The SAT unit's incoming messages spelled the same rough shape in different words: resource limitations, staged evacuations. A note from an agency friend of mine who designs water systems: some people recover spontaneously from the trance state if you can break the feedback loop. Others don't. We don't know why. Avoid exposure to river spray in your eyes or mouth. Treat water like lab work. Stay in your boat, literally and figuratively. I loved him for that last line. Upset. Rapid lived up to its name. Ray's raft hit the left lateral 2 square and lifted in a way that made my stomach take a second to remember gravity. They held it. I will tell you that the sound of 8 people exhaling at once after a near flip is better than any recorded song. By the time the river began to ease toward the widest sky, those long, low miles that smell like sunrise, Criasso, we agreed on a plan. We would rendezvous with river staff at Diamond Creek and decide if we could take out. If not, we would keep moving to Whitmore Wash as a staging point. Then on, if wind and health and luck allowed, toward Pierce Ferry, where the takeout has migrated downstream as Lake Mee receded. The SAT unit pinged rare precious updates. A ranger contact said, Diamond Creek Road access open intermittently. Expect screening. Qualopi coordinating safety. Another Pierce Ferry rapid has changed again with low reservoir levels, big features. Scout thoroughly if you go that far. Between Whitmore and Lava Falls, our boats felt like a single animal made of rope and aluminum and people who trusted each other. Lava's noise rises into the air before you see it. A building size of sound. We beached above on the left, climbed the blocky trail to the Scout. The river looked like it was punching itself in the chest. We traced the tongue with our eyes, counted waves, acknowledged the gut snatch hole that punishes arrogance. We planned the line without talking like amateurs. We let Ray draw it with her hand and Jordan add the quiet caveats. We ran lava one at a time with clean spacing, the other boats invisible and present at once, like the memory of something still happening somewhere else. Our raft dropped into the V, rose, dropped again, then lifted into light with an elegant shudder that felt like apology and laughter in one. We eddied right, and I lay back against the dry bags and watched a condor circle so high it had to be writing its own map of us. Diamond Creek arrived like a promise you don't believe until the hinge in reality appears. The canyon opened to a road cut that rolled down to the water, a ramp of red and brown and dust. The Halapai operations team had set up a careful perimeter. They wore bright safety vests and the calm faces of people who do hard things on long days. There were hand-painted boards with information, a string of cones for order, and a row of folding tables with shade rigs. We beached and waited the way you wait in medical triage. Stillness as a gift you can give to keep the system working. A woman met us with a practice combination of authority and warmth. She asked questions, symptoms, exposures, equipment. We told them about Omar's close call, the Eddy Watchers, our plan to keep moving if extract. Iron wasn't feasible. She told us the road was technically open but bottlenecked beyond any reasonable definition of open. Washed in places from a storm-up canyon, vehicles staged back toward Peach Springs, resources already tasked to higher priorities upriver and on the rim. "You're solid," she said, scanning our gear and the way we stood. "You've got SATCOMs, you've got medical and repair capacity. If you want my opinion, keep rolling for Pierce. We can coordinate eyes on you from the rim when possible. Otherwise, you'll stack here with unknowns and we'll all feel worse." It was as clear as advice gets. We refilled our water, restocked a few items they could spare from a general use cache, thanked everyone in lines too long to feel sufficient, and pushed back out. Sometimes motion is the only kindness you can make for yourself. Between Diamond and Pierce, the land flattened out into the wide quiet that makes the word desert mean space more than dryness. The rapids went to riffles. The sun did the crisp thing it does to the sky when the air is without haze. We saw more of the entrained, people on benches watching wind move grass like a time lapse of tide. A couple seated at the base of a power line tower. Eyes lifted to the faint strobe of an aircraft beacon that blinked at an interval only people with a metronome heart would notice. Once at a breezy bend, a small group stood around a spinning tire hung from a cottonwood branch, their heads turning in synchrony. We paused, put the rafts onto shore with well-practiced landings, and Lily and Ray went in first with their voices low and present. It wasn't dramatic. Human beings can be walked gently out of some spells if you keep them attached to your face, your sound, your patience. We shared packets of electrolytes, a roll of simple crackers. They followed a mile with us like cousins until a sibling group arrived from up the road, thanked us, and took them home in a dust cloud that smelled like hot breaks and relief. The last act of the river was a challenge no story needs to invent. With the lake drawn down for years, Pierce Ferry Rapid has grown teeth that would make the upper canyon blush. The current accelerates into a suite of fast, enormous features that have rearranged themselves season by season. It is not law. It is rock and hydraulics under low water, making a new machine every year. We arrived in the late afternoon, light low enough to etch every ripple. We pulled out above and scouted from the bank, walking the length of the shore until we saw the possible move. A narrow tongue skirting a lateral and then hugging a haystack to slide past the worst of it. The entire plan lived or died on getting the first angle right, which is another way of saying practically everything. We tightened everything that could be tightened. We reviewed signals. We don't shout a lot out there. We point. We hold up numbers. We tap our helmets twice if we mean steady. We went first because we were heavy and because I wanted to put my body where my voice would be credible. The raft felt small above the horizon line, in a way that makes you admire inflatable fabric and webbing like they were miracles. I set the angle we committed to and pulled clean, feeling the blades bite like teeth into proper meat. Warlocks singing the smallest note of protest under load. The tongue grabbed us. A lateral lifted the bow. I corrected against it in a single, deep stroke I'll remember for the rest of my life. We cleared the first hole by a margin so slim I could have measured it in the width of a glove seam. Then the raft leveled, hopped one more standing wave like it was a kid in a photo, and bled off speed into the safety eddy we had picked with our eyes days ago. When the map still felt theoretical, Rye brought her raft through with a move that looked like dancing. Jordan followed with the competence of a person who's been the grown-up in the room so long he forgot to brag about it. One boat hit the second wave weird and took on a bathtub of water. We bailed frantically and laughed while we did it because we could. On the bank, a small group of Halapai staff and volunteers waved from a ridge we hadn't even noticed they could access, their silhouettes boxed in light. Pierce Ferry itself is a ramshackle miracle. A ramp, a sloping shore, a sense that all this used to be underwater and still remembers the feel of it. We bead in an arrangement that by now felt religious. Frames square, lines tidy, bows to land. The operations team had a gentle system, screening questions, basic checks, a place to sit while they made radio calls about whether any trucks could move that evening. We handed over our handwritten logs of sightings and interactions, the little sketches I had made of where and how we'd seen people entrained. A coordinator with a clipboard and sun-sensible hat asked if we were willing to share our notes with teams further upslope working on pattern recognition. I passed over my notebook like a person handing someone the family photo album. She understood and handed it back to me long enough for me to tear out the sheets we didn't need for our own memory. It felt ceremonial, that care for story and day to both. We slept there one more night by the water because the trucks were stacked back to nowhere, and being still was safer than driving tired roads. The camp was a quilt of parties that had found each other over miles, commercial guides with their neat box systems, private trippers who had become professionals under pressure, a handful of day rescuers who had paddled down to help anyone who needed a hand keeping lines straight. We ate simple food with people we would probably never see again, and talked about the canyon the way people talk about a person they all love. In the morning, the little convoy of trailers and trucks got moving in a rhythm that owed everything to experience and kindness. There was no drama. There was checking wheel bearings and signal lights and someone handing Lily an extra pair of nitro gloves because we had run ourselves down to our last ones with our careful hygiene. There was the unnatural sight of our boats on dry land, rolling away from the water that had defined our days so cleanly. The SAT unit pinged when we crested a ridge. There were messages. Some places were worse, some places were stabilizing. The word no one wanted, but everyone used out loud now hung on every report. We answered with coordinates where we'd seen clusters along the river attached to a note that read, like a prayer. Some people can be brought back if you break the loop gently. Anchor their gaze, make your eyes the quietest thing in the room. Back in town, my brain did that thing it always does after long fieldwork, kept building maps even when the job was done. I laid out the entire route in pencil across a roll of paper on my kitchen table. Lee's Ferry to Badger to House Rock, Red Wall Cavern and Nankerhip, Little Colorado, Hants, Horn, Granite, Hermit, Crystal, Elves, Deer, Matcat, Havsu we waved at from the main current. Upset that didn't upset us. Lava, Diamond, Whitmore and the new machine at Pierce Ferry. I wrote little circles where we had seen people drawn to the river's geometry. I scrolled in my human hand what a machine would do more cleanly. Attraction increases with repetitive visual motion and steady sound. Disruption possible with social contact. Voice, touch, eye gaze. Water spray exposure seems to correlate with episode onset in at least one of ours. It was the engineer's way of keeping fear small. Give it labels, frame its variables, hold it to observation. My phone did not stop for days. We were listed contact of contact for anyone with loved ones on the water or headed that way. I answered with the same lines I wish someone had given me earlier. Travel with others. Keep distance from any rhythmic machinery. If anyone shows signs, food, warmth, eye contact, try to do little things well. You'll feel better. And if you find yourself watching something that moves like a metronome, remember a different rhythm and say it out loud. Lily recorded a 40-second voice memo for the volunteer network. This is what a calm check looks like. Here's the tone, here are the words. Don't rush, don't argue with the spell. Offer a hand and bring them back to your breathing. When I finally slept, I dreamed the canyon as a great clock whose hands were currents, each eddy a gear tooth clicking forward. In the dream, I wasn't afraid. The people who had stood like statues were there too, and we were all back at the little Colorado seam, watching colors braid without panic, watching the world go from two truths to one, and back again without it needing to be a crisis. I woke up and the first thing I did was flip my notebook to the last page and write the smallest conclusion an engineer can put in a report without getting scolded. The river teaches you to read moving problems. Keep reading, keep your team close, keep your eyes on the human thing. Weeks later, after the headlines had turned from raw shock to the kind of ongoing story with experts and curves and cautious optimism, we held a small reunion at a park where a river as tame as a city can allow slide under a bridge. We sat on picnic benches, all of us different, without being broken. Omar had printed a series of images from the trip. In one, the black bridge at Phantom arced like a drawn bow. In another, Hermit's waves looked like stone sculptures on the move. Ray stood to speak. She doesn't usually, but she did this time, and her voice had that canyon hush in it. I keep thinking about the way the infected looked at the water, she said, like they could hear a beat we couldn't. And I keep thinking that what saved us wasn't fighting the beat. It was giving each other a better one to follow. The quiet beat of someone saying your name and keeping hold. Jordan raised a cup. We clinked without saying a word. The world had turned into a brand. Big Dan laughed once the way he does when a motor finally turns over after you've done everything right in the right order. Lily's phone buzzed with another volunteer ask. She silenced it for an hour. We ate food we didn't have to keep in ammo cans. We told the kind of jokes that keep the dark from making decisions for you. We said goodbye with the complicated ease of people who had held lines together on a moving thing. On my way home, I parked at an overlook where the river is a thread of metal way down in a wound no map can show you with enough truth. I listened for the beat that had pulled strangers toward danger and understood why they fell in love with it. Then I drove home and started writing this because some stories are driftwood you find after a flood, smoothed by motion, scarred by impact, and shaped into something you can make a table from. A place to set a cup, a place to rest your hands while you prepare to go out again. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams.